It was one of those quiet Saturday mornings where everything felt safe. I was standing in the living room, folding a pile of warm laundry, the smell of lavender still clinging to the fabric. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, soft and lazy, like the day itself had no rush. I remember thinking about pancakes, maybe running to the store later. That's when my phone rang. Unknown number. I almost ignored it, but instinct told me to pick up. "Hello?" I answered, already bracing for a scam call or wrong number. But then, that voice. Soft. Nervous. "Hi. Is this Laura? It's Camille." My heart stopped for half a second. Camille. Eric's ex. I hadn't heard her name in years. My brain scrambled to place her tone, to make sense of why she'd be calling me. "I just needed to clear the air," she said, "to apologize." Apologize? My stomach tightened. I kept my voice steady. Apologize for what? That's when she hesitated. And I mean really hesitated, like she'd just realized she stepped onto a minefield barefoot. Then she asked it, "Wait, you don't know?" My whole body went cold. "Know what, Camille?" I pressed, even though my instincts were already screaming. The silence that followed wasn't just uncomfortable. It was loud. And then, like a secret unraveling too fast, she said it. "We've been seeing each other again." I froze. I didn't say anything at first. I couldn't. It felt like someone had poured ice water straight down my spine. My hands, still holding a t-shirt, started to shake. Camille must have realized what she'd done, because she immediately started backpedaling, talking too fast, too soft, saying she thought he'd told me, and didn't mean for it to come out this way. I could barely hear her over the roaring in my ears. My heart was pounding so hard it was painful. "I thought he was going to come clean soon," she mumbled. Those words. Come clean. Like they were doing me a favor by eventually telling me. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something, but all I could do was stand there, staring at the phone like it had betrayed me too. "How long?" I finally whispered. She hesitated again, then quietly, "A few months." My knees nearly gave out. Months. While I was here folding his clothes, he was folding himself into hers. I don't remember how the call ended. I think I hung up. Or maybe she did. Everything after that was a blur, just the sound of silence and the low throb of humiliation setting in. I stood there in the middle of my living room, holding a towel that wasn't even dry anymore, trying to catch my breath. It felt like the ground had been yanked from under me, but no one had seen it happen. Just me, and a voice from the past that shattered the present. And yet something inside me didn't break. Not yet. I sat down on the edge of the couch, laundry forgotten, phone still in my hand like it might ring again and undo what had just happened. But it didn't. The house was completely still, like it was holding its breath with me. I stared at the wall for what felt like an hour. My mind played back every recent moment with Eric. His late nights, the sudden boys' trips, the half smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. It all started to click. That phone call cracked something wide open inside me. Not just heartbreak, but clarity. Camille had called thinking I already knew. That meant she wasn't confessing. She was trying to ease her conscience before he could spin his version of the truth. I wasn't just betrayed. I was being managed. And that made something in me shift. Hurt gave way to something sharper. A chill that had nothing to do with heartbreak. I wasn't going to fall apart. Not yet, anyway. Because here's the thing about betrayal. It has layers. And underneath the shock and the sadness, there's a space. A space where decisions get made. Quiet ones. Strategic ones. I didn't know what I was going to do yet. Not exactly. But I knew I wasn't going to tell him I knew. Not yet. He'd just handed me the truth. And he had no idea what I planned to do with it. The hours after that call were slow and surreal. Like I was watching my own life from outside my body. I moved through the house like a ghost, emptying the dishwasher, feeding the cat, answering a few texts like nothing had changed. But everything had. Inside, I was unraveling one thread at a time. I couldn't stop thinking about the way Camille's voice cracked, the way she whispered it like she was doing me a favor. And the worst part? She thought I already knew. But now that I did know, I couldn't unsee anything. Every odd little moment from the past few months rushed back like a reel playing in reverse. Eric suddenly working late all the time, saying he was swamped but never showing signs of stress. The way he flinched when I reached for his phone. That spontaneous weekend golf trip with no photos, no tan, and no stories. I had brushed them all off, because that's what you do when you trust someone. You give them the benefit of the doubt, until they use it to bury you. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Not then. Instead, I went to the kitchen, sat at the table, and opened our phone bill. The details spilled out like evidence in a courtroom. His number and hers, dozens of times a week. Long calls, late at night, during lunch breaks, texts that spiked around the same times he was working late. It wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was a pattern, a strategy. He was living two lives, and I was the stage prop in one of them. I sat there for a long time, staring at those phone records like they might suddenly change, like maybe I was wrong. But I wasn't. The truth was right there in call logs and timestamps, cruel and undeniable. He'd built an entire routine around hiding this. And Camille's call? That wasn't a confession. That was damage control. She was trying to unburden herself, not protect me. And honestly, that stung just as much. It wasn't just betrayal. It was disrespect. Not even the courtesy of a lie to my face. Just silence. A hollow routine. Breakfasts, I love yous, shared pillows, while she tiptoed in and out of his world behind my back. And the worst part? I had felt it. I'd had that itch in my gut for weeks, that quiet knowing we so often smother with hope. Because facing it means you might lose everything. But now? I had already lost something far more dangerous. My trust. Still, I didn't say a word to him that night. He came home like usual, tired, distracted, kissed me on the cheek like nothing had happened. I smiled back. I asked about his day, made dinner, listened to him ramble about office politics I no longer believed existed. And while he spoke, I nodded, even laughed. But inside, I was already gone. Not emotionally, strategically. Because something in me had clicked into place. I wasn't just going to leave. I was going to take my time. I slept beside him that night, listening to his breathing, watching the shape of him outlined in the soft light of the street lamp outside our window. He looked peaceful, safe, like a man with nothing to hide. It made my skin crawl. I laid there, eyes wide open, while the weight of everything pressed down on my chest. But instead of breaking, I started thinking. Really thinking. Not about why he did it. I was done with that. But about what came next. That's when something in me hardened. I wasn't going to beg for answers or fall into his arms crying, asking for closure he'd never give. I deserved better than that. I wasn't his fragile little secret keeper. I was his wife. And if he didn't remember that, I was going to make sure he never forgot what it cost him to underestimate me. So I started sketching a plan. Quietly. Carefully. Not out of revenge, but out of self-respect. Out of something deeper than anger. Because this wasn't just about what he did. It was about how I was going to answer it. On my terms. In my time. I didn't want chaos. I wanted clarity. I wanted him to look me in the eye one day and realize I had known all along, and that I chose to be 5 steps ahead, and I wouldn't need to yell. I wouldn't need to fall apart. No, when it came time, I'd let the truth do all the screaming for me. The next morning, I woke up early. Not because I had to, but because I wanted to. There was something powerful about taking control in silence. I brewed coffee, sat at the table with my laptop, and typed "private investigator" near me. It felt strange at first, like something out of a movie. But I wasn't acting. This was real. I had no intention of confronting Eric without evidence so solid it couldn't be spun, denied, or downplayed. I wanted truth with teeth. By noon, I had an appointment for the following day. The investigator was discreet, efficient, and far too experienced in these kinds of things. I told him I wanted confirmation, not because I didn't believe Camille, but because I needed more than her word. I needed timelines, pictures, receipts. I wanted to see where they met, how often, how brazen they'd become. And within days, I had it. Photos of them at a boutique hotel, a dinner downtown, her hand brushing his cheek like it was hers to hold. And the worst part? He looked happy, not guilty, not distant, not conflicted, just happy. Like our life together wasn't even a shadow on his conscience. That image stuck with me more than any explicit proof. It wasn't just infidelity. It was erasure. He had built another world where I didn't exist. And that, more than anything, is what made me sit down with a lawyer the very next morning. Not to talk about if I'd leave, but how. The lawyer was sharp, composed, and didn't waste time on pleasantries, which I appreciated more than I expected. She laid everything out in clean lines: assets, options, leverage. I handed her the file I had been building, printed texts, call logs, bank statements, even the photos. She flipped through it quietly, nodding. "You've done your homework," she said. And I had. Because this wasn't about pain anymore. This was about precision. I wasn't leaving broken. I was leaving prepared. But first, I had to play my part a little longer. So I slipped back into the role of unsuspecting wife. I laughed at his tired jokes. I cooked his favorite meals. I kissed him goodnight. All while the paperwork moved forward behind the scenes. It was exhausting, but empowering too. Like I had a secret strength wrapped in calm. He had no idea. And that was the beauty of it. The more he believed I was in the dark, the more power I had in my hands. Then I planted the final seed, our special dinner. I told him I wanted to cook something nice for the weekend. Just us. No distractions. A cozy night in. He smiled, flattered, completely oblivious. "Sounds perfect," he said, pouring wine like he hadn't just dismantled our life behind my back. I nodded sweetly. But inside, I was already setting the table, not for romance, but for revelation. And trust me, I was going to serve it cold. The days leading up to that dinner were almost surreal. He kissed me goodbye in the mornings, texted me from work like everything was fine. And I played along, every smile more deliberate, every word more controlled. I watched him move through our house, through my life, unaware that every step he took was walking him closer to the edge. The investigator sent over one last batch of photos. They were recent, fresh. Him and Camille, again, arm around her waist, her lips on his neck. I forwarded them to my lawyer without blinking. It was strange how numb I had become to it all. The betrayal wasn't a wound anymore. It was data, evidence. Weight in my favor. The house, the savings, everything we'd built. I was positioning it to fall right into my hands. Not because I was greedy, but because I'd earned it. I'd kept that home warm while he gave his warmth to someone else. Now, I was reclaiming every inch, and he had no idea he was helping me do it. I asked him to pick up dessert on his way home. I told him to wear something nice, said I wanted to feel like we were dating again. He chuckled, told me he liked this new romantic side of mine. I smiled and said nothing, because the night was almost here. The dinner was set, The final move was coming. And the truth? I wasn't nervous. I was ready. That Saturday night, the house smelled like rosemary and roasted garlic. Candles flickered in the dining room. Soft jazz played in the background, one of his favorite old records. Everything looked perfect, cozy, romantic, just the way he liked it. He walked in with a smile and a bakery bag, kissed my cheek and said, "Wow, you really went all out." I nodded. "It's a special night," I replied, and oh, it was. I had invited a few close friends to join us. Last minute, I told him. He didn't question it. Just assumed I wanted company, a little laughter around the table. What he didn't know was that I had chosen very specific people, friends who had known us for years, friends who had believed in our marriage. And, most importantly, friends whose opinions still mattered to him, the kind that might just burn when they hear the truth. We toasted, we laughed, we passed plates of food like nothing was boiling underneath. Then, after dessert, I stood up. "I actually have a little surprise," I said, pretending to fumble with my phone. He looked up, half curious, half distracted. "I had a really interesting phone call earlier this week. Someone wanted to apologize." That got everyone's attention. I tapped play. The room went still. And then Camille's voice spilled out through the speaker, soft, nervous, unmistakable. "We've been seeing each other again." A gasp, a fork hitting the table. And Eric's face? It was the kind of silence you feel. He looked like he'd been struck across the face, eyes wide, mouth open, searching for something to say that wouldn't make it worse. But there was nothing left to protect. Camille's voice kept playing, trembling with guilt, admitting every ugly piece. You could hear the room breathing. No one moved. No one blinked. I didn't look at him right away. I just stood there letting the words hang in the air like smoke from a fire I hadn't started, but I was damn sure going to finish. When the audio stopped, no one spoke. Not for a few seconds. And then I slowly reached into the drawer beside me and pulled out the envelope. Thick, neatly labeled. I walked over and placed it in front of him, like a final course. "This is for you," I said. My voice calm, measured. "And don't worry, your ex already helped me prepare it." That line hit him like a punch. I could see the denial rise in his throat, but it couldn't escape. Not in front of witnesses, not after that. His hands shook as he opened the papers. Divorce, asset division, property ownership, all clean, all legal, all done. He looked up at me, like he didn't know who I was anymore. But here's the thing. I hadn't changed. I had just stopped shrinking. Everyone around the table looked at me differently too. Not with pity, but with something closer to awe. I wasn't the victim of his story. I was the editor. Excuse, half apology, half denial. But I didn't give him the chance. I raised one hand, gentle but firm, and said, "Don't. You've already said enough." And he had. Between the late nights, the lies, the silence, he'd written every line of this ending. The room stayed quiet, watching him squirm. It wasn't rage they saw in me. It was resolve. And that, I think, unnerved him more than if I'd screamed. I wasn't here to make a scene. I was here to end one. He looked around the room for someone to save him. But no one moved. No one would. Our friends weren't stupid. They'd seen enough now to piece the rest together. And I didn't need their sympathy. I had their clarity. I wasn't afraid of being alone at that table. I had been alone for months. The only difference now was that he knew it too. And as he sat there with his guilt laid bare, I collected the dishes like a perfect host, calm, graceful, in full control. That was the part that hit him hardest. Not the recording, not the papers, but the way I didn't fall apart. I had built the entire night like a house of mirrors, letting him catch a glimpse of himself from every angle. No distortion, no excuses, just truth, framed and well lit. And while he tried to catch his breath in a room that suddenly felt too small, I looked across the table at the woman I used to be and nodded. She finally had her moment. The divorce went through faster than I expected. I think he just wanted it over with. Wanted to disappear before the weight of what he'd done crushed whatever dignity he had left. And honestly, I didn't stop him. I kept the house, the savings, the car. But more importantly, I kept my peace. My nights were quiet again, not from loneliness, but from freedom. No more waiting for footsteps that came too late. No more pretending I couldn't smell perfume that wasn't mine. Camille? She didn't stick around. 2 weeks after the dinner, he moved out. 3 weeks later, she was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no public fallout, just vanished. Maybe she realized that if he could lie to me for that long, he could lie to her just as easily. Or maybe she just got what she came for and got bored. Either way, it wasn't my problem. Not anymore. I wasn't interested in their mess. I had cleaned up enough already. And now, the house was mine again. Truly mine. I started repainting, rearranging, pulling his leftovers from drawers and closets and setting them by the door, one box at a time. There was something sacred in the process, like I was reclaiming the air. Every corner I touched felt a little lighter, a little more me. I wasn't just moving on, I was rebuilding. Not as a woman scorned, but as a woman awake. And with every sweep of the brush, I reminded myself, this was the price of freedom, and I had paid it in full. Some days, I'd catch myself reaching for 2 coffee mugs instead of 1. Muscle memory. Habit. But I'd smile and put the second one back. Not in sadness, but in acknowledgement. That version of my life had ended, and this one was just beginning. The quiet didn't scare me anymore. It felt like possibility. I started waking up early, going on long walks, buying fresh flowers just because I wanted to see something bloom. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting on anyone to join me. People kept telling me how strong I was. But strength wasn't what carried me through. It was clarity. The moment I stopped asking why and started asking what now, everything shifted. I stopped clinging to the version of Eric I had loved and started accepting the one I had actually married. That was the hardest part, not the betrayal, but the acceptance. Once I made peace with the truth, I was unstoppable. And the people around me? They noticed. They watched me rise. And they chose me. Friends who had once seemed unsure picked up the phone. Family members reached out with softness in their voices. No one blamed me anymore for being blindsided. They admired me for how I handled it, with dignity, with strategy, with my head held high. I hadn't just walked through fire. I had carried a damn bucket of water, poured it out, and rebuilt from the ashes. And honestly, it looked good on me. The last thing I did was box up the final drawer in the hallway, the one with his old keys, mismatched socks, and random things he never bothered to notice I kept organized. I carried it to the front door, set it down gently, and just looked at it for a moment. It wasn't about anger anymore. It was about closure. That box wasn't just filled with junk. It was filled with the version of me who tolerated too much, smiled through too many lies, stayed silent for too long. And she didn't live here anymore. I took one last walk through the house that day. The walls were lighter. The silence was different. Not hollow. Peaceful. I passed the mirror in the hallway and caught a glimpse of myself. Not broken. Not bitter. Just free. I opened the windows, let the air rush in, and breathed in the life I had reclaimed. Not because of him, but in spite of him. And as I tossed his final box into the donation pile, I laughed. Because that phone call, the one that shattered everything, it ended up being a gift. Camille didn't mean to set me free, but she did. She just wanted to apologize. And in the end, I should have thanked her. Not for the confession, not even for the truth, but for lighting the match that burned the bridge I was too afraid to walk away from. She handed me my freedom, and I took it.
Your sister doesn't deserve to be valedictorian, my father said, calm and cold, the night before my graduation. She cheated her way through school. Everyone knows it. The room went still. My mother stared at her plate. I couldn't breathe. Then my 12-year-old brother stood up, reached into his pocket, and pulled out a voice recorder. Actually, Dad, he said, I think it's time everyone heard what you did. I remember exactly how it felt, the way my stomach dropped when my father said those words, how the green beans on my plate suddenly became the most interesting thing in the world as I refused to make eye contact with anyone. The dining room in our suburban home had never felt smaller, the walls closing in with every breath I took. Rebecca doesn't have what it takes, my father continued, cutting into his steak with surgical precision, as if dissecting my academic career. Never did. It's all smoke and mirrors. I was 18, graduating summa cum laude tomorrow, with a full scholarship to Princeton. 4 years of late-night studying, perfect attendance, and sacrificing nearly every social event for academic excellence had led to this moment, being named valedictorian of Westlake High School's class of 2022. And my father was determined to ruin it. My mother, Ellen, sat with her eyes fixed on her plate. Richard, please, she whispered, not tonight. My father scoffed, taking a sip of his wine. What? We're all thinking it. I'm just saying it out loud. My younger brother, Michael, pushed his glasses up his nose, his 12-year-old face unusually serious. I expected him to stay quiet, as he usually did during my father's tirades. Michael was the peacekeeper in our family, the one who tried to smooth things over, who disappeared into his room when voices got too loud. But tonight was different. Actually, Dad, Michael said, his voice steady as he stood up from his chair. I think it's time everyone heard what you did. The silence that followed was deafening. My father's fork paused midway to his mouth, his expression shifting from smug certainty to confusion. What are you talking about? He demanded, setting down his utensils with a clatter. Michael reached into his pocket and pulled out a small voice recorder, the kind he used for his science projects and nature observations. My heart began racing. What was he doing? I didn't mean to record it, Michael explained, his voice suddenly smaller, but still determined. I was recording bird calls for my science project in the backyard last week. You were in your office with the window open. My father's face drained of color. Put that away, Michael. Now. But Michael, my quiet, conflict-avoiding little brother, pressed play. My father's voice filled the dining room crystal clear. I need you to do something for me, Jim. It's about Rebecca's college applications. I recognized the name, Jim Holloway, the school board president and my father's golf buddy. Those recommendation letters need to disappear. My father continued on the recording. Replace them with the ones I sent you. Make it look like she's been struggling. Like she's unstable. My mother gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. And the standardized test scores, my father's recorded voice continued. Those need to be flagged for review. Create some doubt. Princeton needs to resign that scholarship. She can't leave. The business needs her here, working for me after graduation. Michael stopped the recording, his small hand trembling slightly as he set the device on the table. There's more, he said quietly, about how you hacked into her email to cancel her college visits. How you told her math teacher she was cheating when she wasn't. The room spun around me. For 4 years, I battled mysterious obstacles in my academic career. Recommendation letters that never arrived, test scores that were questioned, college visits that somehow got canceled. I'd worked twice as hard to overcome each setback, never suspecting the saboteur was sitting across the dinner table every night. My father stood up, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. This is absurd, he sputtered, but the confidence was gone from his voice. You don't understand what you heard. This is adult business. It sounds pretty clear to me, Michael replied, suddenly looking older than his 12 years. You tried to ruin Becca's future because you wanted to control her. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The truth was crashing down around me like shattered glass, cutting into everything I thought I knew about my family, my struggles, my achievements. My father turned to me, his face contorted between rage and panic. Rebecca, you know how important the family business is. Princeton is across the country. We need you here. I was doing what was best for the family. Best for you, my mother said, her voice eerily calm as she stood up. Not for her. Never for her. I'd never heard my mother stand up to my father, not once in 18 years. She'd always been the cushion between his expectations and my reality, trying to soften his criticism while gently encouraging me to try harder, do better, be more. Ellen, my father started. No, she interrupted. I've watched you crush her confidence for years, made excuses for you. Told myself you were just pushing her to be her best. Her hands were shaking, but her voice was steady. But this, sabotaging her future, that's unforgivable. My father's face hardened. You're all overreacting. Everything I've done has been for this family, for our future. You and your future, I finally found my voice, though it came out smaller than I intended. Your plans, your business. I stood up, legs unsteady beneath me. I earned that scholarship. I earned valedictorian. I earned Princeton, not because of you, but despite you. You ungrateful. He began, but Michael cut him off. I sent a copy to Principal Martinez this morning, my little brother said, chin raised defiantly, and to the school board. And Princeton. The color drained from my father's face. You what? Michael pushed his glasses up again, a nervous habit, but his voice remained steady. I knew you'd try to take the recorder. Delete it. Say it wasn't real. So I made copies. I stared at my little brother in disbelief. This quiet, careful boy who collected insects and built model airplanes had just dismantled our family's carefully constructed facade with surgical precision. My father looked at each of us, seeming to shrink before our eyes. The towering figure who had dominated our lives with his expectations and criticisms suddenly appeared small, cornered. Without another word, he stormed out of the dining room. Moments later, we'd heard the front door slam, followed by the screech of tires as his car pulled out of the driveway. In the silence that followed, I turned to Michael. Why? I asked. Why did you do this tonight? He looked down at his plate, suddenly just a 12-year-old again. Because I heard him on the phone with someone earlier, planning to call Princeton tomorrow morning, to tell them something bad about you. My mother sank back into her chair, covering her face with her hands. Oh God, she whispered. I couldn't let him ruin tomorrow for you, Michael continued. Not after everything you've done to get here. I moved around the table and pulled my little brother into a hug, feeling him tense briefly before relaxing against me. Thank you, I whispered into his hair, still soft and smelling of the apple shampoo he used since he was a toddler. I'm sorry I didn't do something sooner, my mother said, her voice cracking. I knew he was hard on you, but I never imagined. She trailed off, shaking her head. I failed you. We all did what we thought we had to do, I said, surprising myself with a steadiness in my voice. But that stops now. The next morning, I stood at the bathroom mirror, adjusting the cap and gown that hung over my graduation outfit. My phone had been buzzing nonstop with messages from the principal, guidance counselor, and even Princeton's admissions office, all assuring me that my father's actions would have no bearing on my future. There was a soft knock at the door. Michael stood there, already dressed in his one good suit, looking both proud and nervous. Is Dad coming? He asked quietly. I shook my head. I don't think so. My father hadn't come home last night. His side of the closet was half empty when I passed my parents' bedroom earlier. Michael nodded, accepting this with the same quiet resolve he'd shown last night. Are you mad at me for blowing everything up? I knelt down to his level, straightening his clip-on tie. You didn't blow anything up, Michael. You told the truth. That's never wrong. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts, I said. Sometimes the truth has to hurt before it can heal. He considered this, then nodded. Your speech is going to be amazing. I smiled, thinking about the valedictorian address I'd stayed up rewriting until 3 a.m. I hope so. It will be, he said with the absolute certainty only a 12-year-old could muster. Because you're telling the truth now, too. The auditorium was packed. Rows of graduating seniors in their caps and gowns, proud families clutching flower bouquets and cameras. I scanned the audience as I sat on stage with the other honor students and school officials. My mother and Michael were in the third row, exactly where they promised they'd be. The seat beside them, reserved for my father, remained empty. When Principal Martinez called my name, the applause was thunderous. News travels fast in small towns, and while the details of what had happened were private, Rumors about my father's attempts to sabotage my future had already begun circulating. I approached the podium, unfolding the speech I'd rewritten in the dark hours of the morning. The original version had been full of platitudes about perseverance and following dreams, safe, expected, forgettable. This one was different. Fellow graduates, honored guests, family and friends, I began, my voice stronger than I expected. We're told that high school is about discovering who we are, what we're made of, what we value. I looked up, meeting my brother's encouraging gaze. What they don't tell us is that sometimes this discovery comes at a price. Sometimes we learn that the obstacles in our path weren't put there to make us stronger, but to hold us back. And sometimes those obstacles come from the people we thought would support us the most. A hush fell over the auditorium. Last night, I learned that someone I trusted had been actively working against my success for years. Not because they didn't believe in me, but because they believed in me too much. They were afraid of what I might become if given the freedom to choose my own path. I paused, taking a deep breath. I'm not sharing this for sympathy. I'm sharing it because I know I'm not alone. Many of us have faced people who tried to dim our light because it shined in a direction they didn't choose for us. Parents who mapped out futures we didn't want. Friends who pulled us back when we tried to rise. Teachers who underestimated us. Or worst of all, those voices in our own heads telling us we aren't enough. I looked around at my classmates, seeing recognition in many of their eyes. But here's what I learned. No one can take your accomplishments from you. No one can diminish your worth unless you let them. And sometimes the greatest act of courage isn't achieving something extraordinary. It's simply standing in your truth when others try to rewrite it. My voice grew stronger with each word. I stand before you today as valedictorian, not because my path was easy, but because it wasn't. Every obstacle made me more determined. Every setback made me work harder. And ultimately, that's what defines us. Not the challenges we face, but how we respond to them. I looked directly at Michael then, his small face beaming with pride. Sometimes our heroes don't look like we expect. Sometimes they're 12 years old and have the courage to speak truth when adults won't. Sometimes they're the friends who believed in us when we didn't believe in ourselves. Sometimes they're teachers who saw potential we couldn't see. I turned to acknowledge the faculty seated behind me, many of whom had written the recommendation letters my father had tried to intercept. As we leave Westlake High today, I want us all to remember this. Your path is yours alone. Your success belongs to you. And your truth, however uncomfortable, however inconvenient, is always worth telling. As I concluded my speech, the audience rose in a standing ovation. Through tear-blurred vision, I saw my mother and Michael standing, clapping so hard it must have hurt. And there, at the very back of the auditorium, barely visible in the shadows, was my father. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. I didn't smile, didn't nod, simply acknowledged his presence with the smallest inclination of my head before turning away. Whatever journey he needed to take now was his alone. My path was clear. Later, as families gathered on the lawn for photos and congratulations, I felt a tug on my gown. Michael stood there, holding out a small, wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, kneeling down to his level despite my formal attire. "Open it," he urged. Inside was a new voice recorder, sleeker than his old one. Attached was a note in his careful handwriting. "For recording your new story at Princeton. Love, your biggest fan." I pulled him into a tight hug, not caring about the tears that threatened to smudge my carefully applied makeup. "Thank you," I whispered. "Not just for this, for everything." "Are you scared?" he asked against my shoulder. "About going so far away?" I pulled back to look at him. A little, I admitted, but mostly excited. "Will you come back?" The question held layers of meaning. Would I return to our hometown, to the family business, to the life that had been planned for me? "I'll always come back for you," I promised, "but not for anything else. Not anymore." He nodded, understanding perfectly. "Good." My mother joined us then, camera in hand. "One picture of my graduates," she said, her smile wobbly but genuine. Though Michael wouldn't graduate for years, we all understood what she meant. We had both crossed important thresholds today. As we posed, arms around each other in the June sunshine, I thought about the speech I'd given, about obstacles in truth and choosing your own path, about how sometimes the hardest person to stand up to isn't an adversary, but someone who claims to love you. And I thought about my 12-year-old brother, who had taught me that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's a quiet voice on a recorder, simply telling the truth when everyone else is too afraid to speak. My story isn't unique. Many of us face people who try to control our futures, who claim to know what's best for us while serving their own interests, parents who confuse love with ownership, partners who mistake support for control, friends who call themselves loyal while holding us back. What made my story different was having someone brave enough to expose the truth, no matter how uncomfortable. Someone who understood that real love means wanting someone to succeed on their own terms, not yours. That night, as I packed the last of my belongings for Princeton, I placed Michael's voice recorder carefully in my carry-on bag. Not as a reminder of my father's betrayal, but as a symbol of what happens when someone believes in you enough to fight for your future, even when that someone is only 12 years old. The truth doesn't always set us free immediately. Sometimes it first makes us confront realities we've been avoiding. Sometimes it forces painful choices. Sometimes it reshapes families and futures in ways we never expected. But in the end, the truth is all we really have, the foundation upon which we build authentic lives. And sometimes it takes a child to remind us of that simple fact. As I closed my suitcase, I made a promise to myself. I would never again allow someone else to write my story. And more importantly, I would always, always be the kind of person my little brother could be proud of. Because sometimes our heroes aren't caped crusaders or legendary figures from history. Sometimes they're 12 years old, with glasses too big for their face and the courage to press play when the moment demands it. You've always been the family disappointment, my grandfather said, raising a glass at his 80th birthday. He pulled the cloth off a giant family portrait. Everyone was there, except me. The room froze. Smiles faded. No one spoke. Then my 15-year-old daughter stood. She walked to the table, placed a worn envelope in front of him. "Actually, great-grandpa," she said, steady and clear. "I found this in the attic last summer. And I think it's time everyone knew who really betrayed this family." The grand dining room of my grandfather's estate fell completely silent, crystal glasses suspended mid-toast, forks hovering over plates of barely touched anniversary cake. The portrait loomed above us all, a masterful oil painting depicting 4 generations of the Caldwell family. Everyone was there. My grandfather Lawrence seated regally in the center, my parents standing behind him, my brother and his perfect family arranged to his right, my cousins clustered artfully to his left. Everyone except me, and by extension, my daughter Olivia. The artist captured our family perfectly, grandfather had proclaimed minutes earlier, his voice carrying the authoritative tone that had built Caldwell Industries from nothing. Only those who understand family loyalty are included. His eyes had locked with mine as he delivered the calculated blow, another public reminder of my alleged betrayal 15 years ago, when I testified in a deposition about unsafe conditions at one of our manufacturing plants after a worker died. The family had closed ranks, declaring me a traitor. The fact that my testimony had been legally compelled didn't matter. The fact that I'd been telling the truth didn't matter. In the Caldwell family, loyalty trumped everything, including honesty. I'd only come to this celebration for Olivia's sake. At 15, she'd grown increasingly curious about her heritage, about the family that had ostracized us before she was even born. I had hoped, perhaps foolishly, that time might have softened their stance. The portrait's unveiling had been my answer. Now, as my daughter stood with the poise of someone twice her age, I felt my heart race. "Olivia," I said quietly, "this isn't the time." But she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes, so like mine, were fixed on my grandfather. "I found this while helping Mom clean last summer," she continued, sliding the yellowed envelope toward the center of the table. I didn't understand what it meant at first, so I did some research. My grandfather's face remained impassive, but I noticed his hand, the one gripping his monogram cane, tighten until the knuckles blanched white. "What is this nonsense?" my father interjected, reaching for the envelope. Olivia didn't flinch. "They're letters. Between great-grandpa and Martin Decker from the Department of Environmental Protection. From 1989. I froze. The name was familiar. A regulator who had suddenly dropped his investigation into our company's waste disposal practices decades ago. It had been before my time at the company. A story referenced occasionally as an example of navigating government overreach. My brother Thomas laughed nervously. "Old business correspondence? Really, this is hardly appropriate for a birthday celebration." It's not business correspondence, Olivia said, her voice steady but gentle. It's evidence that great-grandpa knew about the chemical dumping in Riverdale for years before anyone got sick, and that he paid Mr. Decker to bury the reports. The room seemed to inhale collectively. Riverdale was a working-class neighborhood downstream from our oldest manufacturing plant. In the early 1990s, it had experienced alarming cancer clusters. No definitive cause had ever been proven, though many suspected industrial contamination. The company had publicly denied any responsibility. "This is outrageous," my grandfather finally spoke, his voice dangerously quiet. "Where did you get these forgeries?" "They were in a box in Mom's attic, with her childhood things," Olivia explained. "In a folder labeled insurance in your handwriting." She turned to me. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have shown you right away, but I was trying to understand it all first." I couldn't speak, couldn't move. The implications were crashing over me like waves. "You can't possibly understand what you're implying," my father said, his corporate training kicking in. "Never admit fault, always control the narrative." "I understand perfectly," Olivia replied. "Great-grandpa knew the plant was poisoning people. He paid someone to cover it up. And 15 years ago, when Mom testified about unsafe conditions at another plant, she wasn't betraying the family. She was the only one being true to it." My cousin Rachel, always the peacemaker, attempted to salvage the situation. "Perhaps we should discuss this privately after the celebration." "No," I found my voice at last. "No more private discussions. No more secrets." I looked around the table at the family that had exiled me. For 15 years, I've lived with being called a traitor. I've watched my daughter grow up without knowing her family because I chose to tell the truth when a man died unnecessarily at our Westbrook plant. I stood in my chair scraping against the polished hardwood floor. I was subpoenaed. I was under oath. I told the truth about safety violations that everyone in management knew about but ignored because fixing them would have delayed the quarter's production targets. "You could have found a way around it," Thomas muttered. "We always do." "That's exactly the problem," I said, suddenly feeling a strange calm. "We always do. We always find ways around responsibility, around consequences, around the truth." I couldn't do it anymore, not with James Rodriguez's death on my conscience. He had 3 children, did you know that? His youngest was 4. The family portrait seemed to loom larger now, its calculated omission no longer a source of pain but a badge of honor. I wasn't included because I didn't belong among those who valued reputation over human lives. My grandfather slammed his cane against the floor. "Enough. I will not have my legacy questioned by a child who understands nothing of what it takes to build something lasting." Legacy. Olivia's voice was softer now, genuinely curious. "Is this what you want your legacy to be, great-grandpa?" "Because I've been studying our family history for a school project, and do you know what I found?" She pulled a folded paper from her pocket. "Your father, my great-great-grandfather, started this company with one principle. We build to better lives, never at their expense. It's right here, in his founding letter to the first employees." I had never seen those words before, but they hit me with the force of recognition. This was the missing piece of our family story, the original purpose that had been lost in the pursuit of profit and power. My grandfather's face changed. For a brief moment, something flickered across his features, recognition, perhaps, or regret. Then the mask returned. "You've disrupted a family celebration with wild accusations and fabricated documents," he said coldly. "You both should leave." I expected anger from Olivia, the righteous indignation of youth confronted with injustice. Instead, she carefully refolded the founding letter and placed it beside the envelope of incriminating correspondence. "We'll go," she said. "But these stay, because everyone deserves to know the truth, especially family." She looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes without judgment or accusation. "I'm proud to be a Caldwell. I just hope someday the Caldwell name can be something worth being proud of again." As we walked toward the door, my mother, who had maintained her careful silence throughout the confrontation, suddenly stood. "The letters," she said quietly. "Are they really from Lawrence?" I turned, surprised to hear her speak. "I haven't seen them yet, but knowing Olivia, she's verified the handwriting, the paper, probably even the ink." Olivia nodded. 3 independent document experts confirmed they're authentic. I used my savings from tutoring. A murmur ran through the room. My methodical, thorough daughter had approached this like the scientist she aspired to become, gathering evidence, confirming its validity, presenting it objectively. My mother nodded once decisively, then did something I had never seen in my life. She removed herself from my father's side and walked to join us. "Mom," I whispered, shocked. "I've kept silent too long," she said, her voice stronger than I'd heard it in years. "Watched this family choose the wrong path too many times. I can't do it anymore." The room erupted then, voices raised in protest, accusations flying. The carefully maintained facade of family harmony shattered completely. Through it all, my grandfather sat stone-faced, staring at the envelope that contained proof of his most carefully guarded secret. As we three walked out together, grandmother, mother, daughter, I felt a strange sense of completion, as if a circle had been closed. "I'm sorry," I said to Olivia once we were outside. "I shouldn't have brought you here, shouldn't have exposed you to all this." She looked at me, wisdom beyond her years in her expression. "I needed to see it, Mom, to understand where we come from, the good and the bad." My mother took my hand, the first affectionate gesture between us in 15 years. "Your daughter is remarkable," she said. "She reminds me of you, before we taught you to be silent." We stood together in the fading evening light, 3 generations of Caldwell women who had chosen truth over comforting lies. Behind us, through the windows of the grand house, we could see the continuing commotion. My father gesticulating wildly, my brother on his phone, my cousins gathered in tight, concerned clusters, and my grandfather, still seated at the head of the table, staring at the portrait that suddenly seemed less like a family legacy and more like evidence of his greatest failure. The fallout came swiftly. By morning, the family lawyers were calling with settlement offers, non-disclosure agreements, promises of family reconciliation if we would just return the documents quietly. My mother, staying in our guest room after her historic departure, listened to my end of these conversations with a sad smile. "They still don't understand," she said when I hung up from the third such call. "This isn't about money. It never was." Olivia, eating breakfast before school, looked up from her textbook. "What do they think will happen?" "They're afraid of public scandal," I explained. "Civil lawsuits from Riverdale residents if this information gets out. Maybe even criminal charges, though the statute of limitations may have run out on some of it." "Will we go public?" she asked carefully. I considered this. The documents provided a path to vindication, a way to prove I hadn't betrayed the family but had actually been upholding the company's original values. But they would also destroy the company that employed thousands, including many good people who had nothing to do with my grandfather's decisions. "I don't know yet," I admitted. "But whatever we decide, we'll decide together. No more unilateral choices in this family." My mother nodded approvingly. That's already an improvement over the Caldwell way. 3 days later, as the calls from family lawyers grew increasingly desperate, we received an unexpected visitor. My grandfather's car, the stately black Lincoln he'd driven for decades, pulled into our driveway. He emerged slowly, looking smaller somehow without the backdrop of his mansion. He leaned heavily on his cane as he approached our front door. I met him on the porch, unwilling to invite him into our home without knowing his purpose. Olivia stood just behind me, a quiet presence of support. "You have something that belongs to me," he said without preamble. "No," I corrected gently. "I have evidence of what you did. There's a difference." He looked past me to Olivia. "You're very thorough, young lady, a quality I would have appreciated in different circumstances." Olivia said nothing, her expression neutral but attentive. "I've come to make you an offer," he continued. "Not money. I know that won't work with you." The last part held a note of something almost like respect. "What then?" I asked. "A trade, the letters for a confession." I stared at him, certain I misheard. "A confession?" "I'll publicly acknowledge what happened at Riverdale, set up a fund for the affected families, admit that your testimony about Westbrook was truthful and necessary." He straightened slightly. "In return, the letters stay private, a family matter, dealt with by family." I studied his face, looking for the manipulation, the hidden agenda. "Why now? After 15 years of painting me as a traitor?" "Because," he said with unexpected candor, "I recognized something in your daughter that reminded me of my father, the company founder, a certain moral clarity I lost somewhere along the way." He shifted, uncomfortable with this level of honesty. "And because your mother walked out, in 60 years of marriage, she's never defied me. It made me consider that perhaps I've been wrong about more than I realized. It wasn't an apology, not really, but from a man like Lawrence Caldwell, it was an extraordinary concession. I need to think about it, I said, and discuss it with my family. He nodded once, the gesture both acknowledgement and dismissal. Ever the patriarch, even in retreat. As he turned to leave, Olivia spoke for the first time. Great-grandpa, she called. He paused, not turning fully. The family portrait. Will you add us to it? A complicated emotion crossed his face. Would you want to be included, knowing what you now know about me? About us? Olivia considered this with the thoughtful deliberation that characterized everything she did. I think, she said finally, that portraits should tell the truth. The whole truth. That would mean including everyone, even the parts of our family story we're not proud of. He stood very still for a moment, absorbing her words. Then, with a barely perceptible nod, he continued to his car. Later that evening, I sat with my mother and daughter at our kitchen table, the same one where I'd helped Olivia with homework, celebrated birthdays, weathered the storms of single parenthood. It was scared and imperfect, nothing like the immaculate dining table at the Caldwell estate, but it had held our small family securely through the years of exile. What do you think we should do? I asked them both. My mother, who had spent a lifetime accommodating my grandfather's demands, spoke first. I think the Riverdale families deserve to know the truth, but it doesn't have to destroy everything. Lawrence's offer is unexpected and meaningful. Olivia nodded. I didn't do this for revenge. I just couldn't stand seeing you treated like you'd done something wrong when you were the only one brave enough to do what was right. I reached across the table, taking each of their hands in mine. Then we accept his offer, with conditions. The fund for Riverdale families must be substantial. His acknowledgement of the truth must be public and complete. And the company adopts new, transparent ethics practices, starting with the founding principle your great-great-grandfather established. Olivia smiled. We build to better lives, never at their expense. 2 weeks later, I stood in the corporate headquarters of Caldwell Industries for the first time in 15 years. My grandfather had called a press conference ostensibly to announce his retirement and a new corporate initiative. The reality, as arranged in our careful negotiations, would be much more. He spoke for nearly 30 minutes, acknowledging the Riverdale contamination, the subsequent cover-up, the systemic practices that had prioritized profit over safety. He announced the creation of a $50 million fund for affected families. And then, in the most difficult moment for a man who had never publicly admitted error, he turned to address me directly. 15 years ago, my granddaughter tried to change our course. She chose truth over family loyalty, as I defined it then. For that, she was ostracized, her character maligned, her place in our family denied. He paused, visibly struggling. I was wrong. She was right. And today marks the beginning of our attempt to make amends, not just to the communities we've harmed, but to our own family. Cameras flashed as he gestured for me to join him at the podium. As I moved forward, I caught sight of Olivia in the audience, sitting between my mother and, surprisingly, my father. 4 generations of Caldwells gathered not in a fictitious portrait, but in the messy, complicated reality of a family attempting reconciliation. There is one more announcement, my grandfather said once I stood beside him. Effective immediately, Elena Caldwell will join our board of directors, heading a new ethics and compliance committee with full investigative authority and direct reporting to regulatory agencies. Murmurs ran through the assembled press corps. This was more than we had negotiated. This was real power to effect change. Why me? I asked him quietly as applause filled the room. The corner of his mouth twitched, the closest thing to a smile I'd seen from him in decades. Because you're the only one I trust to do it properly. You're the only one who was willing to lose everything for the truth. 6 months later, a new portrait was unveiled in the Caldwell Industries lobby. Not an oil painting this time, but a large photograph. It showed not just the direct line of succession, but every branch of the family, including me and Olivia front and center. Below it, engraved in bronze, were the words of the company founder. We built to better lives, never at their expense. Olivia stood before it, studying the image critically as was her habit. It's still not the whole truth, she observed. Pictures never can be. No, I agreed. The whole truth is too complicated for a single image. That's why we need stories, and memory, and people brave enough to speak up when the official portrait leaves something important out. She slipped her hand into mine. a gesture becoming rarer as she grew into her independent teenage self. I didn't do it to be a hero, you know. I just couldn't stand watching you be erased anymore. I know, I said, but that's often how the most important changes happen. Not through grand gestures, but through small acts of courage when someone finally says, no, this isn't right. The truth matters more than comfort. She considered this, then nodded toward the founder's words. Do you think we'll live up to that? Really? I don't know, I admitted. But for the first time in a very long time, I think we're actually trying. As we turned to leave, I caught sight of my grandfather watching us from his office doorway. He didn't smile or wave. Some changes come slowly, if at all. But he nodded once, an acknowledgement not of surrender but of respect. The family portrait hadn't been destroyed after all. It had simply been redrawn to include all of us, our triumphs and our failures, our courage and our cowardice. The full, complicated truth of who we were and who we might yet become.